I have previously issued a couple of sets of tapes with my preferred opening repertoire. The repertoire where I made a lot of innovations in my personal analysis, and the openings I like myself. And I think they provided solid opening repertoire for someone who followed my recommendation. However, not everyone, this opening repertoire did not fit everyone's taste. So therefore, on this series, I want to cover essential chess openings. Essential, I mean, reason I'm using the word essential because only openings that make any sense. I'm not going to be covering openings like first move h3 or first move like a4. Well, I'm only going to be covering for white or for black openings that make any sense, which is maybe like 95 to 98% of all chess openings exist. So I'm not going to cover that small percentage that totally ridiculous openings. So what I want to do, I'm not going to cover some openings like Caro-Kann defense or Pirc defense, like every possible variation, because I don't think I'm going to live that long. So that's going to take like forever to do. What I would like to do here is that to give one variation, one suggestion for every opening, every meaningful opening for white, one line for white and one line for black. So the recommendation will be mine, not necessarily the best line of this opening, but this is the line that you're going to be okay if you use and you feel comfortable with. So if you want additional information, of course you have to use additional sources. But if you play this opening the way I would recommend you to do, you're going to be okay. That's my knowledge of this opening, and if you match that level, you will always be okay in opening stage, and you will always have good window for the middle game. So let's start the way I want to do it. Cover these openings in alphabetical order, and I would like start with Alekhine defense, and well, let's start with the line for white. So e4, knight f6, that's the Alekhine defense. And now if we want to cover this opening for white, and what line would I recommend? Of course, we don't want to cover knight c3 move, second move, or d3 move, or some kind of f3 move. Or there is also bishop c4 move. Those are not the moves I would recommend. What I would recommend to go the main line, which is pawn e5, knight to d5, and pawn to d4. And here, only two moves for black that make any sense. Those are pawn d6 or knight to b6. Now, the line I recommend you to play, for the line I recommend to play for white here, this move order does not make any difference, because the reason sometimes they don't play d6, they prefer to play knight b6 first, it's to eliminate some variation like bishop c4 or some gambit lines. So, but if you play on d6 or knight b6, c4, then only move that will make any sense here for black, if they play the knight b6 and we go c4, they have to go d6, and if they go d6 first, then after c4 they go knight b6, which is 100% transposition and identical positions. So what white will do here, will play e takes d, and obviously taking with the queen is not a good idea for black, because white will go c5, and now in order not to lose a piece, black has to go queen e6 check, then white goes bishop e2, and after knight d5 and knight f3 white is way ahead in development, and queen on e6 makes no sense at all. So only captures that will make any sense here for black are e takes d and c takes d. So let's start with e takes d. Now there are several ways for white to continue developing in this position. There is move knight c3, which is most popular move, bishop e7, and one of the ways for white to play is bishop e3 and continue queen f3. It's one of the newer continuations, which is okay, but line I want to recommend is the easiest line and quickest line to learn, as I think you will feel most comfortable using it. Bishop d3, after bishop e7, black castles, white plays knight e2, and suppose black plays knight c6. Now, here we have to concentrate on a couple of things. We have to keep an eye on our c4 pawn. The c4 pawn is very important to know that c4 pawn may be a target. For example, if white plays castle here, which we can do, now black may play knight b4. And black is attacking d3 bishop, so black wants to play knight takes d3, which will make their life a lot easier. But knight takes d3 they don't play, because white plays bishop b1. Now after white plays bishop to b1, black cannot play knight takes c4, because then white wins after a3 move, attacking the b4 knight, and when b4 knight moves either c6 to a6 square, after queen to d3, you see the double attack attacking knight on c4 and pawn on h7. White simply wins a minor piece in the game. So this is very important to know. In some cases, this knight b4 may be a threat. For example, bishop f6, black may play bishop f6, and now black may be attacking our d4 pawn. Now black is so-called threatening, maybe they are not threatening, but they're intending to play knight takes d4. And now bishop e3 move is a serious mistake, because on bishop e3, black can play knight b4. And after bishop b1, they will play knight takes c4. And now a3 move is not nearly as effective. After knight takes e3 and pawn takes e3, knight simply moves back to c6, and black has an extra pawn for no visible compensation. So that means we still have to keep an eye on our c4 pawn, and meanwhile d4 pawn is hanging. So what we have to play here, the reasonably good move, is simply pawn to b3, and if black tries to play knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and bishop takes d4, white has an advantage after bishop takes h7, king takes h7, and queen takes to d5. 4. This is better position for white, and quick overview of this position. White's king is safer. White has a better minor piece. Bishop on c1, after it will be developed on b2, is very powerful, and white has more space. Obviously, we cannot go in detailed analysis over this position, but this position, in this position, white has clear advantage. So now going back here, now there are a couple of other subtleties in this position. For instance, instead of playing bishop f6 in this position, black may go bishop g4. Now white goes f3, and now black may go bishop h5. Now how do we play this? We go again b3. Now we are ready for knight b4, bishop b1, because pawn on c4 is not going to be hanging. And what white's plan is, eventually they're going to go d5, and after knight e5, bishop will go to c2, and white has comfortable space advantage and a better game. Now let's look at some tricky ways for black to prevent white from stabilizing their position and getting a space advantage. There are some tricky ways for black to play. e4, knight f6, let's quickly get to the position. d4, knight d5, knight d5, d4, d6, c4, knight b6, ed, ed. Knight c3, bishop e7, bishop d3, and here they can play knight c6 first. Now we will go knight e2, and here also knight b4 does not do much, does not do anything, because after bishop b1, black cannot play knight takes c4 because of queen to a4 check, winning a piece. But the tricky move order for black here is to play bishop to g4. Now this bishop is pinning the knight on e2, and obviously white cannot castle now because knight takes d4. So what white should do here, they should play f3. And now black may play bishop h4 check. And you see that white is in check. We don't want to go g3 because bishop takes f3, and white is in trouble because rook is hanging, and after rook f1 or even castle, black simply plays bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, and bishop e7, where white does not have any compensation for missing pawn. So the correct way to play after bishop h4 check, this should not be discouraging for you to play king f1. That's a good move. Now, after bishop goes to h5, let's see what happened to this position. We have king on f1. That's true. Well, we rather have a king castled. But what does black have? Black has bishop on h4, which is mildly put, it's kind of stupid piece. And bishop on h5 doesn't do much either. So this bishop on h4 has to come back eventually. And how far is white from castling? They are not going to literally castle, but they can castle by hand eventually by playing g3 and king g2. So meanwhile, let's try to complete development for black. If they castle, what can we do here? We can go b3, and eventually white is going to go bishop e3, queen d2, and g3 and king f2 or king g2. White is still gonna have the same advantage in space, and black is gonna have some dysfunctional pieces, like both bishops are dysfunctional, and those knights, especially one on b6, is really needs a lot of improvement here. So this position is also okay for white. Now, this is if black recaptures ED. Now, the other recapture, that's the line I would recommend. And if you prefer some different lines, okay, you can pick them up from any some of the opening books. That's not necessarily, I want to say, that's not necessarily the best line, but this is comfortable line. That's one I use, and I would recommend you to play. Now, the other continuation is after e5, d5, d4, d6, c4, knight, b6, e takes d, c takes d. Now here, this position is very well known and its age is old. So white should go knight c3. This is the main move here. g6, that's how black should play. Now bishop e3. That's not the only way to play. That's not maybe even the main variation here. But that's the one I would choose every time I play against Alekhine defense. And I had good results, and I have great confidence in it. If I want to recommend to play any line, that's the one it will be. So bishop g7, rook to c1, castle, and pawn to b3. Now, this is a typical position for CD recapture. Now, there are two main moves. One is e5 for black, and the other one is knight c6. I'm quite confident that white has advantage in both continuations. Well, let's start with the knight c6. We should play d5, knight to e5, and now let's analyze this position. White is slightly behind in development, but as you can see, position is not open. The advantage white has in this position is in a pawn structure and absolutely bad piece, knight on b6. This is always problem for black. Now, what black did when you make first three moves with the same piece, like knight f6, knight d5, and knight b6, either first three moves or first 3 out of 4 with the same piece, and piece ends up on b6. This is not the way is recommended to play game of chess. But when knight ends up on b6 and it's totally smothered with white's pawn structure and totally restricted, this position cannot be good for black. So I would simply recommend bishop e2, and no matter what black does here, knight f3 next move. People have played against me f5 and after knight f3, f4, but you simply go bishop d4 and you castle later and you put your rook on e1, and there is, no matter what black does, you gonna make this happen. You're gonna castle, you're gonna put your rook on e1. Eventually, black's pieces gonna experience serious problem, and advantage in controlling e-file for white and backward e7 pawn is going to take their toll. So this position is simply, if black plays knight c6, is simply not good. After d5, knight e5, and bishop e2, followed by knight f3. Actually, there was a game played by Anatoly Karpov, and after f5 that was played, I like knight f3 move. And Anatoly Karpov, actually I covered this game in my previous Roman Slav series. Karpov has played f4, and after knight g4 played bishop takes g4, f takes g, and knight e2, which is also very good for white. And then again, if I had to give my personal recommendation, I would prefer bishop e2. But I'm sure you're going to take Karpov's recommendation, so I still have to say what I think is best. So bishop e2. So move was played by black in this. Another move that can be played by black in this position is e5. So black is trying here to open position quickly before white's king side is developed, and then they try to discomfort white this way. So d takes e, and d takes e. And now there are two moves for white. White must play c5, so they can play c5 right away, or they can play queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and then c5. This continuation after exchange queens and c5 happened in my game against Lev Albort in US Championship. I got a very big advantage after the opening. So what would I recommend here? You go ahead and you can explore c5, and this is a good position. But my recommendation is queen takes d8, rook takes d8, c5, forcing knight to d7. That's the only move, since after knight d5 and rook d1, black simply loses the game right away, because on bishop b6, bishop c4, and pin on d file is decisive. So after knight d7, white can play bishop c4, and after knight c6, knight f3, then they castle and they have sizable advantage. So there is a threat of knight g5 also has to be considered, and black is not very comfortable here. So on knight a5, possible bishop d5, and white has an advantage in every variation here. This is what I would recommend to play with white against Alekhine defense.